Welcome to The Grace Way, a program from Grace Baptist Academy. Each episode is designed to share the heart and vision of our school through thought-provoking conversations, biblical truth, and meaningful insight. Whether we are answering your questions, outlining our philosophy, hearing from our staff or other professionals, our goal is to strengthen the partnership between home and school, all for the glory of God. And now, here's your host, Craig Carpenter.
Well, I'm happy to be with you once again here on The Grace Way, especially after the day I've had a first done today. If you care for personal anecdotes, I had my eyes dilated. And just a pro tip, if you ever have your eyes dilated, try to get somebody to drive you home from the eye doctor. Just a recommendation there. That was not something that I was expecting, but nevertheless, as I start off this episode, just give me some time, because if I pause or say something wrong, I guarantee you it's probably correct in my notes, but I'm just having trouble reading because, boy, I sit about a foot or so or 2 feet away from the computer screen with my notes on it while I'm doing these episodes, and it is kind of a little difficult for me to read still. So forgive me, bear with me. My voice is back, so that's good. If you were here a couple episodes ago, you knew that I could barely talk, but that's not going to be the case today. I could talk for a long time, which is why we're on episode 9 here of The Grace Way, and in our series, What Does the Bible Say About Money? I should have said part number 9. I think this is episode 16 now, so I didn't know if we'd ever make it this far, but here we are, part number 9. Like I said in about 2 episodes ago, I didn't know exactly how many episodes we'd record from our series, What Does the Bible Say About Money? It's sort of a plunge into the abyss, if you will, trying to figure out what direction we want to head with the program and how we are going to use it. But I pray that these biblical lessons have been a blessing to your life. But as we discussed in last week's episode, I pray that more than them just being good to listen to, which would only serve to stroke my ego, I pray that they would be life-changing. I pray that there would be something that you change in your life as a result of these biblical lessons, because again, the Bible is a wonderful book. It could change your life, but only if you let it, only if you follow the principles that are located in its pages. Last week, we talked about some biblical principles regarding money, and as we wrap up, I'd like to review, but at first, I'd like to start with our questions that we've asked in just about every episode, and that is, are you honoring the Lord with your finances? Isn't that the baseline question when it comes to what does the Bible say about money? Does anything else matter other than what the Lord thinks about your finances and how you're handling them? Are you honoring Him with how you handle your finances? The first test question we asked was, are you stewarding your possessions well? And of course, you can go back to the first two parts of this series where we talked about stewardship, the fact that God owns everything and we are merely managers of what He has entrusted to us. Then the second test, are you furthering the gospel with the resources God has entrusted to you? Do you give to Faith Promise Missions? Do you give so that the gospel can be carried in your stead around the world? Are false teachings about money hindering your spiritual growth? Of course, in these lessons, we address the false notion that the Bible condones or approves of socialism. We talked about the false notion that money is evil, and we also talked about other things as well. Then test number 4, are you following biblical principles in regard to money? And that's really where we got started off last week. And the first point was work. Work. Why should we work? Well, work provides income. And of course, we need money to live in this world. And as Dave Ramsey says, your income is your greatest wealth building tool. The Bible talks a lot about work. It talks about it as a responsibility. It talks about it being profitable to us. Proverbs 14:23 says, in all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury. I said that verse to a student this week who was questioning the purpose of the work we were doing in class. Hard work earns promotions. We talked about hard work earning the ear of authority. We also talked about the lack of work can lead to destruction. We talked about the fact that lazy people will always be found wanting more. And then we also pointed out the verse, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, if you do not work, you should not eat. Of course, we talked about living counter to the culture that tells us that we are victims and that the economic system is out to get us and is not constructed in our favor. But then we also proposed a counter notion, that is that we live in the greatest time period of history as far as ease and comfort go. And it's easy to complain, but more work solves a lot of problems. I saw a meme in the interim this week, and maybe my phone and the computer were listening to me, but the meme was basically kind of mocking Dave Ramsey, calling him a boomer for saying this very statement, that it's really easy to complain, but more work solves a lot of problems. And of course, he didn't say those exact words, but this was the principle of what he was trying to get across. And unfortunately, for the people who are mocking him, well, this is biblically based. And again, we talked about how two things can be true at once. We talked about how it can be true that it is more expensive to live in today's society, especially during this time period where gas prices are almost double what they were just about 3 months ago or so. But it's easy to complain, but more work solves a lot of problems. And then one of the things we talked about is that you can't work the bare minimum and expect to live a grand and glorious life, a life filled with ease and comfort, a life with the best or all the best that the world has to offer. You can't retire at 60 by working just a few hours a week. You really have to choose what are you going to do? Are you going to work now, sacrifice now? Are you going to work 80 hours a week now, or are you going to work just the standard amount of hours and then try to whine and complain about why you don't have, or why you're in debt, or why you can't afford things, or why the economy is so unaffordable? Again, you can have it both ways. We said these things very gently, not a bludgeon, but just some perspective on the concept of a work-life balance. One of the last things we covered in that part was time. Don't expect big money right away. Learn all you can, develop a good reputation, and use your time wisely. This is where we kind of let off with that little bit of a lengthy story about the young man who spent a lot of time with his girlfriend rather than going to work. And then when life happened, when the unexpected bills of being out of your parents' home came calling, well, he was not prepared. And so what happened? Well, he had to sacrifice the family time, the time that he wanted to spend with his wife, the time that he wanted to spend with his children after they were born. He had to sacrifice that because, well, now we had to go out and get a different job, get a second job, and make ends meet. Again, I do not knock anybody for going out and providing for their family, just offering them a perspective. When you're single, try not to get in trouble. Okay, one of the ways we could try not to get in trouble is by working a number of hours. Then secondly, we talked about avoiding debt. We said that debt discourages people, debt distresses people, debt divides people. We talked about the causes of debt, trying to keep up with the person next to you, trying to impress the person next to you. But the people who are in debt, they have no plan for their money. They are not thinking about the future, and really, they are not content, which was point number 3, where the Bible talks about in 1 Timothy 6, verses 6, 7, and 8, as well as Philippians 4, verse 11, to be content. To be content. The Bible says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Those two things paired together are really where the gain comes from. We talked about we gave some debt statistics last week. Of course, the total credit card debt in America over $1 trillion with a T, dollars. And then we talked about contentment and growth. We talked about the fact that contentment or being content does not mean that you do not pursue growth or excellence. You're just content with what you have, not where you are. So that's where we left off. Let's wrap up this entire series. What does the Bible say about money? By getting into the last few points, and then I'll give some closing thoughts. Today's lesson is going to be slightly more practical. And as much as I try to really stick to the Bible and exactly everything that I say, every point is backed up by a Bible verse. At least that's what I've tried to aim for. Today's lesson and today's points that I'll bring up and today's principles that I'll bring up may not have a specific Bible verse that back them, but I believe the principles are found in the Bible. So for instance, number 4 in our lesson and practical principles regarding money, I would say create a budget and live by it. Now, the Bible does not talk specifically about having a budget. It does not say anywhere, thou shalt budget. That is not one of the 10 commandments. However, 1 Corinthians 14, verse 40 says, let all things be done decently and in order. And I don't know what you think the word all means, but all means all, and that's all means. Okay, that's a little bit of a tongue twister, but all means all. And so let all things be done decently and in order. And of course, we're extracting a principle from this verse. We never want to ignore the context, But at the same time, one of the things that we need to do or handle decently and in order is our finances. How do you develop a budget? That's a question that needs to be answered. How do you develop a budget? Do you have a budget? Do you live off of a budget? Do you have a designated place for the money that you get? Does it have somewhere to go? Now, if you're sitting there and you were like me in high school when somebody said that, of course, during the school year, I didn't really work a job. During my senior year, I started picking up some extra hours during the winter just to kind of tie things over. I had some trips that I needed to pay for, some things that come along with being a senior. And so I did pick up some extra hours with the boss that I had during the summer months there. But for the most part, I didn't really make any money coming in or have any money coming in during the school year. And I really only worked, as I mentioned last week, started my job after my 10th grade year of high school, worked at 10th grade year, 11th grade year, 12th grade year. I believe I referred to this last week, and it's certainly something I would recommend doing. By the time you're in 10th grade, I think it would be a good recommendation for you to start getting a full-time job, start getting full-time employment, especially as you look toward the future. But what is a budget? And I'm going to help you with that today. I'll give you some practical tips at the very end where I believe a budget that can work for anybody in school, anybody of student age, anybody with inconsistent money coming in, anybody with not a lot of bills. And so we'll get to that. But how do you develop a budget? Well, what is a budget? The budget sets predetermined spending priorities. Okay, a budget is not necessarily, when we think of a budget, let me back up. When we think of a budget, we just think of something where it's just numbers on a paper and of things that we have to spend. Well, in most students' case, right, they don't have priorities. They don't have things that they absolutely have to spend money on to live. There's things that my wife expects me to spend money on. You know what one of them is? Food. Okay, you know what else she probably wants me to spend money on? The house, the mortgage payment. Okay, she probably wants me to pay the property taxes. She also wants me to pay for clothes for her, myself, and our daughter. Okay, so the things that I have and the things that you might have, we're talking about two total different scenarios. But your budget tells others what is important to you. So for a young person, when you get money, it's probably even more important for you or more of an indicator as to what is important to you. Is the future important to you? Well, then I bet you'll save a lot of money. Is having nice clothes important to you? Well, then I bet you'll spend a lot of money. Is it important to have the latest fashion trends? Is it important to have the latest Jordans that come out on the rack? Do we need those? Do we have to have those? Well, if it's a priority to you, it'll be included in your budget. A budget for everyone is really a predetermined list of their priorities. So, for me, my priority is my family. Therefore, the top of my budget is going to make sure that they are taken care of. What is at the top of your budget? What is the most important thing for you? Does it have a dollar amount? Is it the future? Or is it something else? Is it something tangible? Secondly, one of the things when we're developing a budget, we need to write down everything that you have to purchase. Now, again, for a student, this is probably not going to be a lot of things. Hopefully, it's not a lot of things. I would hope that there's not a lot of things that you absolutely have to purchase. Of course, every person's situation is different. I went to school with a couple students who had to pay their own school bill. And I'm very thankful that my parents paid my own school bill. I got the opportunity to attend Christian school, and that was a wonderful blessing. I am glad that on top of all the things that I was involved in, and all the sports that I participated in, the activities that I participated in, one thing that I was not having to do was go out and pay or earn enough money for me to pay my school bill. But write down everything that you have to purchase. Let's talk about behavior next. It is not just enough to just create a budget. You cannot just write down a budget, write down how much you're going to spend, and then voila, you're good to go. No, let the budget be the boss. You have to let the budget be the boss. One of the things that Dave Ramsey says, and I still remember this quote when I heard it for the first time in high school, and that is money is 20% head knowledge and 80% behavior. What does he mean by that? Well, you can know everything you can about money. You can know how the economy works. You can know how to budget. You can know how to invest. You can know all these things about money. But if you do not live by sound financial principles, you cannot be successful. You can know how money works, but if you do not control your spending, and if you spend more than you make, guess what's going to happen? You're going to go into debt. And so that's why he says money is 20% head knowledge and 80% behavior. One of the things that I said on last week's episode was that in every household, typically, there's a husband and a wife, and one is the husband, or one is the spender, and one is the saver. And it varies based on household. In my household, my dad was more of the spender. My mom was more of the saver. In my household, I'm definitely the saver, and my wife is more the spender. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. One of the things that I had to learn about money, and this is, again, one of the things that I've heard, and I think it is a great principle to live by, especially if you are a saver. And that is, there's times to spend money and there's times to not spend money. And you got to know what time it is. There's times when you just need to reach into your wallet, saver, and you need to spend the money on somebody else. There's time when you need to break down and finally get a new pair of shoes because the ones that you are wearing have had a hole in them for 3 months. I'll tell you a story. When I was in high school or maybe in college, I really would just go to the thrift store, and my work shoes were just tennis shoes from the thrift store. I would get the nicest pair I could find that looked the most durable. Typically, they'd cost between $5 and $7. They would last me about 9 months to a year or so, and that's a great deal for somebody in my field who was working, construction, remodeling. For somebody who was doing landscaping, the shoes would be dirty in a day. And I remember one time I was walking through Walgreens, and a lady came up to me. And boy, I was at the tail end of the shoes that I was wearing. Absolutely. I probably had holes in both of them. My foot might have even been sliding out. But there was a lady who looked at poor little old Mr. Carpenter and handed me a $20 bill and said, "Oh, will you please go get yourself a new pair of shoes?" And that was a blessing that day. I still remember that. I still very thankful for that lady. Maybe I'll see her again one day. I don't know. I don't even remember what she looks like, to be honest. But at the same time, that was a huge blessing to me. And what I really wanted to tell her was, boy, the last 3 pair of tennis shoes that I've had have cost $20. But I'm very thankful, and I was able to use that money to go get myself a new, to me, pair of shoes. But the point I'm trying to make here is that money is all about behavior. If you cannot control your spending, if you cannot control going to the gas station and having to buy something, and having, every place that you go, you have to go in and get something. You have to go out to eat all the time. By the way, just another side quest real fast here. One of the worst things a young person can do is spend their money on food. I didn't understand it at the time, but growing up, my parents did not allow me to spend any money on food. And that's mainly because, well, there was food at home. And there's food at home, young person. There's food at home. I don't think any of you, your parents, are making you go hungry. Now, if that's not the case for you, you come talk to me. We'll help you out, okay? But the point I'm trying to make here is that there's food at home, and you need to be thinking about, well, how am I going to spend my money? Do I have to buy something? Do I have to go into the store and buy something? If my friends are buying something, do I also have to open up my wallet too for no good reason other than I don't want to look like the cheapskate in front of my friends when everybody else is buying something? Money is 20% head knowledge and 80% behavior. You can know everything about money, but if you cannot rein in your spending, well, then you are going to have problems. So create a budget and live by it. Write down everything that you have. Okay, allow the budget to be your boss. But again, remember that the budget is really indicating where your priorities are. What is important to you? What is important to you, young person? Is the Lord important to you? Is he important enough to tithe 10% of all the things and all the money that you earn, the birthday money that you bring in, the little job money, the little work money that you get here and there? Is it important enough to tithe? Is it important enough to you? Is the Lord important enough to you? Is getting the gospel important enough to you to send money to people who carry the gospel around the world? Well, I don't know. It isn't. It is to me. It is to me. Next, know what you have and the condition it is in. Know what you have and the condition it is in. Proverbs 27, verse 23 says, "Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds." One of the things and one of the concepts that a student needs to understand is something called your net worth. What is your net worth? Your net worth is equal to your assets, or the things that have an economic value, minus your liabilities, or what you owe. Now, most of you probably don't have any liabilities. You probably don't owe any money. You probably don't owe anybody any money. You don't probably have a credit card. Typically, they don't allow people under the age of 18, unless there's been a law change or something, to open up a credit card or to open up a credit account. However, most of you probably have at least a few things that are worth economic value. Now, as we discussed in the stewardship episodes, your treasure is not a lot. Okay, remember you have there's three areas of sacrifice, three areas of stewardship: time, talent, treasure. And even though it seems crazy, you probably have the most time in your life right now where you are at now. You probably don't have a lot of talent just because you're so young. You probably don't have a lot of treasure just because you're so young, and all those things are okay. But you do have probably a little bit of a net worth. So your net worth and your assets, remember, your net worth is equal to your assets minus your liabilities. So assets are things like cash. What is in your bank account? What is in the piggy bank on your dresser? It's stocks or bonds. Maybe if you're in my case, the first 3 years I was alive, every year for my birthday, my grandparents gave me a $50 bond for my birthday. That was that matured, I believe, last year or 2 years ago. I can't remember exactly. And I cashed it in for, I think, I don't know, $120 or something. So maybe you have that. Okay, and when you get older and you're able to buy a home, that is also an asset. And then the liabilities are things like credit card debt, car loan, the mortgage on your house. So I hope this is not a too complicated topic to talk about here on the Grace Way. I'm trying to help you understand, at least give you kind of an understanding of what money is. But my point here is taken from Proverbs 27:23, where it says, "Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks." So do you know what you have? Do you know the condition it is in? You know, I'm thinking about this right now. Right now, I'm looking at our house, and I know that we need a new roof. Our roof is coming to the end of its life. It was a Katrina roof. It was a roof that was put on after Hurricane Katrina. And I'm looking at it right now, and I know that it's going to probably have to be replaced within the next year or two. So I'm paying attention to that. I'm paying attention to the condition my house is in. One of the things that I have on my computer is, and my wife knows about this, is we kind of keep a scorecard of all of our accounts, all of our assets, our liabilities, what is owed on our home, a home valuation. We also are trying to steward our things well, steward our possessions well. We're looking around our house and trying to look at things and say, well, if we sold today, what could we get for our house? And is there anything that we could do to our house that would increase the value? Okay, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the point I'm trying to make, again, is from Proverbs 27:23, where the Bible says, boy, pay attention to what you have. Know what you have. Know the condition it is in. The Bible says, and look well to thy herds. Boy, pay attention to them. Don't let something get so out of repair that, well, it's going to cost way more to fix it. For instance, why does that oil light come on? Well, to indicate that your car needs oil. Please don't be one of those people or hear about a story where, you put tape over the oil light that comes on, and then one day you need a whole new engine on a brand new car just because, well, you let the oil light stay on. So know what you have and the condition it is in. Determine the value of all the things that you have. By the way, again, not the value that it is to you. Those shoes that you're putting on your feet, you might have paid $100 for them, but if you've worn them once, they're not going to be worth $100 to anybody else. They might only be half of that. So think about the value that somebody else might pay for those things. Determine what and who you owe, and then write it all down. And then it's just simple addition and subtraction from there. So take good care of what the Lord has given you. Again, there's such a stewardship factor here. And then think about the future. Knowing what you have helps you prepare for the future. And knowing the condition of what you have helps you to not be surprised down the road, right? I'm going back to the example about my roof. I know I need a roof. It's not going to be a surprise if there's a leak in the house within the next 2 years. Now, I want to avoid that because if there is a leak in the house, well, that's just going to cost me more money because now I got to fix the drywall. I got to paint. I got to do some drywall patching, okay? So those are things that I want to all avoid. One of the things that you can learn to do is employ the tactic or employ the use of something called a sinking fund. A sinking fund is when you set money aside or a few dollars every month for a future purchase. So let me give you this scenario. If you're a young person who's graduating 8th grade this year and you look down the road and you're thinking, well, I'll probably need maybe $5,000 for college for the first year. Now, I know that in our area, Jackson County, if you're listening and you're as a student of Grace Baptist Academy here, boy, there are some really good options for junior college in this local area. In fact, it's not even $5,000. In fact, depending on the score that you get on your ACT test, $5,000 probably could cover even the first 2 years of college. But if you started, let's say, from the end of 8th grade to the start of college, you know it's going to be about 50 months. And if college is going to cost about $5,000 for those first year or those first 2 years, all you have to do is set aside $100 each month, and you will have the entire first year paid for, or the first 2 years paid for, before you even start. So think about that. If you're graduating 8th grade, and again, college is not the way for everyone. Some people need to go to trade school. Some people need to go and get a job right out of the gate. Some people need to go to Bible college, especially if you're going to be a pastor or a missionary. That's something I would definitely encourage you to do. But you can also apply this concept of a sinking fund to anything in your life. Do you want to get a car in a year or two, young person? Well, then you better start setting aside some money every month for that purchase. If you want to go on vacation, boy, you want to go on vacation in 5 years, and it's going to cost $5,000. We'll start setting aside a little money now. So one of the things that my wife and I are doing is we look at our roof. We know that it's going to cost several $1,000s to fix the roof at our house. What are we doing? We're trying to set aside a little bit of money every month, so that way when we get to repairing the roof, we don't have to put all of that money down at once. So point number 5, know what you have and the condition it is in. Point number 4 was create a budget and live by it. Number 5, know what you have and the condition it is in. That is a tongue twister. I apologize. And number 6, think about and live for the future. The Bible says in Proverbs 21 verse 20, there's treasure to be desired and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man spendeth it up. Young person, you need to make some decisions. You need to make some important decisions about money. And we've already talked about many important decisions that you need to make. You need to decide if you're going to tithe or not. You're going to need to decide if you're going to send money to world missions. You're going to need to decide if you want to attend college. Like in the example we just gave, you need to decide if you're going to have a car or you're going to need a car in a year. But there's certain things that you need to identify. You need to identify and place things into 3 different categories. The 3 different categories are needs, wants, and desires. A need is something that, well, this isn't a trick question here. A need is something like food. It's something that you absolutely need to live. You cannot go very many days without food and water. So that should probably be at the top of your priority list. Okay, this food, by the way, it can be from anywhere. But it's typically way cheaper to eat at home than it is to go out. Okay, secondly, and continuing with the food example, for the wants. You might need food, but you might want to eat at a restaurant. But eating at a restaurant is not a need. Why? Because it's more expensive. It is a want. And then thirdly, desires. Desires. So needs, wants, desires. And again, in keeping with the example regarding food, you might want to enjoy a certain expensive restaurant or a certain restaurant experience, like at Disney World. Or you might want to go to some fancy restaurant, I don't know, on a date. Or you might want to go where it's not just about the food, but it's also about how they serve the food. I don't know what you want. But why do people live paycheck to paycheck? Well, there's an abundance of reasons, of course, but one of the things is when they think that they need something that's a want or a desire. They think that, well, enjoying a certain restaurant experience, it's not just something that I'd like to have in the future if I have enough money. No, that's something that I absolutely need right now. Well, no, that's not the case. And again, all of these things can be enjoyed. A meal at a restaurant is not a bad thing. A meal at a restaurant might be a want, but every once in a while it might be a need. I think about dates for husbands and wives, right? One of the most popular forms of a date is to go out to a restaurant. And so that might be a need in a relationship. However, typically, in the scenario and in the examples we are giving here, eating at a restaurant is going to be a want. So anytime you need to make a decision regarding if you're going to spend money, and by the way, again, as a young person, you're probably making less decisions about where to spend money at this point of your life, and that's okay. That's okay. Everything happens in stages. And hopefully maturity will dictate how you spend your money. But you need to identify and place in the following categories each purchase. Is it a need? Is it a want? Or is it a desire? Now, if we're talking about thinking about and living for the future, one of the things that we need to bring up is the topic of sacrifice. Practically, Sacrifice now for a better future later. Can you do that? Do you have to have all the nice things now? One of the things that we've talked about is don't try to live like your parents right off the bat. One of the things that you didn't see about your parents is the fact that they might not have lived in the house that they live in now when they were 21, when they were 22, when they were first married. You didn't see them grind and work jobs that didn't pay very well for the first few years of their marriage when you were still not on this planet, and they were working very hard and they were trying to sacrifice for the future and sacrifice for their future children. You didn't see that. And so you grew up and became accustomed to a certain way of life. And now that's the custom way of life that you want when you go and you become on your own. And so sometimes maybe you need to scale back your expectations and think, well, you know what? I'm going to sacrifice now for a better future later. One of the things is don't try to buy the same house, the 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that your parents had right off the bat when you first get married, mainly because it's impractical. Okay, you can only live in one room at a time anyways. But practically, sacrifice now for a better future later. That's one thing, again, we could drone on and on. I think you get the concept of it. One of the things that Dave Ramsey, again, and I've referenced him many times, mainly because, well, he's got sound financial advice and sound biblical wisdom. Why do I say biblical wisdom? Because one of the things that Dave Ramsey will say is that, well, where did he get all of his money and his financial advice from? Well, he got it all from the Bible. And so practically, sacrifice now for a better future later. Spiritually, give generously to the Lord and others. Sacrifice in 2 ways, for the future and for others. There are things money cannot buy, and that's another thing that you need to understand. If your pursuit is money, you will be left unsatisfied. If that is your sole goal in life, I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you, but you won't be happy. You'll be happy temporarily, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but money cannot buy happiness. And if your pursuit is money, you will be left unsatisfied. Money cannot buy salvation or the Lord's power. Look at Acts chapter 8 and verse 18, 19, and 20. And when Simon saw that through laying on the hands of the apostles' hands, the Holy Ghost was given, he offered them money, saying, "Give me also this power, that on whomsoever I lay hands, he may receive the Holy Ghost." But Peter said unto him, "Thy money perish with thee, because thou hast thought that the gift of God may be purchased with money." When we talked about contentment, we talked about the fact that you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. And what Peter is saying here to this man Simon, he's saying, thy money perish with thee. Newsflash, your money is going to perish with you. When you die, your bank account will be emptied and will be given to other people. That money will not sit there. That money will not transfer to heaven. It is just going to go to other people. And I don't think that Simon was necessarily trying to buy salvation or buy this power that the disciples have in this context in Acts chapter 8. I don't think he just didn't understand. There was a certain amount of ignorance. And Peter is saying, thy money perish with thee. But money cannot buy salvation, and it cannot buy the Lord's power. I hope and I pray that each one of you under the sound of my voice want the Lord's power in your life. And I'm not trying to make it, again, we've already addressed the prosperity gospel. We've already talked about how gain is godliness from 1 Timothy chapter 6 and how that is the incorrect view of money. But money cannot buy these things. Only a relationship with Christ can. But money cannot buy peace. Money can only buy temporary happiness. Money can buy you a beautiful wedding ring, but it cannot buy you a happy marriage. Money can pay for a beautiful wedding, but it also can't pay and buy you a happy marriage. You know, when I proposed to my wife, right? That was a great day, and I bought a decently expensive ring. I'm not going to say how much, just in case she listens to this episode. But there was a happiness. And you know what? That day I proposed to her on a Sunday afternoon, and that night we went back to church. And by then, of course, a lot of people had heard about it, and they're coming up to her and they're asking, "Let me see the ring." And you know, as the guy, you're just kind of standing off to the side, watching and going, this is great. I'm glad that my sacrifice, my blood, sweat, and tears at my job has paid off. Okay, and one of the things, by the way, here's another pro tip. Total side quest, young men. Young men, this is the advice that my parents gave me. And if nobody's given you this advice, this is what I would tell you about that ring. like it or not, people are going to judge you and your love for your future wife based on the size of that rock and the way that ring looks. Again, you could take that or leave it. It is completely up to you. But I am just trying to give you a piece of advice. But money can only buy temporary happiness. That ring has not done anything for our marriage other than tell the world that she's mine. And I don't mean that in an ownership way. Please understand where I'm coming from. But we're together. That's what that ring tells people. And like my parents told me, the piece of advice that they advised me on before I purchased that ring was that people are going to judge your love for her based on the size of that rock. And again, I understand everybody's situation is different. Please understand and know that I understand that. But that was a great day. But you know what? The excitement of that day, the excitement of the ring, really, it wore off. You know, I would think, and again, I'm not trying to be rude or crude here, but my wife puts that ring on her finger every day and she goes out with it. But it's less of a conscious thought than when I first put that ring on her finger. Boy, when I first put that ring on her finger, there was excitement, there was a buzz, there was this idea that she could never take her eyes off of it, never let it out of her sight, of course. But now it really is just second thought. And maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe we all, every time a married person puts on the ring, right? I'm wearing my wedding ring right now. Every time I put that ring on my finger, I should be reminded of the love that we have for each other. But sometimes you just put that ring on and that's about all. Okay, money can only buy temporary happiness. Money paid for that ring, but it is a biblical foundation that has built our marriage. And it's the same thing with your finances. Money can buy temporary happiness, but money alone and the pursuit of money will not lead you to success. Biblical principles, biblically based decisions will lead you down to the path of success with your finances. Speaking of success, there was a study out of, I think it was done in Canada, but there was there was a person who studied young people. And he came up with something that he calls the success sequence or the anti-poverty formula. And the success sequence or the anti-poverty formula says that if you do just 3 things, you will have less than a 1% chance of being poor. So if you do these 3 things, 99% of the people that do these 3 things are not going to be poor. Number 1, complete high school. Complete high school. Get a diploma from high school. Number 2, get a job. By the way, any job. A job. That's all you have to get. Number 3, do not have kids outside marriage. Those 3 things. That's it. These are 3 easy decisions to make. These are 3 easy tasks to accomplish. And look what it gets you. There's barely any chance that you will be impoverished. You know what we understand from these 3 things, by the way? Doing it God's way works. All these 3 things are certainly, these principles, these steps to avoid poverty could be found from principles and truths and precepts located in the Bible. Complete high school. Finish what you start. Number 2, get a job, right? How long did we talk about what the Bible says about work? Number 3, do not have kids outside marriage. Okay, that very biblical principle. What we find is that doing it God's way works. And some people, they step back, and I'm sure if this man who came up with this study, a very popular study, by the way, if you Google it and want to read more about it, if this man was not a Christian, I'm sure that he came to this conclusion and was like, wow, that's really neat. And a Christian looks at this and reads the story and goes, wow, it's almost like the Bible is true and the Bible is correct. And so we have to understand that when the world comes up with a solution to a problem, the solution of avoiding being poor, we understand that solution is going to be biblically based. It's going to be rooted in Scripture. It's going to have a biblical principle behind it. But God's way is the best way. Let's leave you with some practical notes here. And I'm just going to give you some practical notes, some clothing thoughts. I want to give you one challenge and then we'll be done. Simple budget for students. And they are listed in order of priorities. Write this down. If you do not have a budget, I encourage you to write this down. Pause it, get a pencil, get a piece of paper, and I believe this is a biblical formula for how you should spend your money. First of all, Number one, very easy. Very easy. Tithe. Tithe. We already know what percentage of our income that should be. And by the way, all of the things that I'm about to tell you, they are not dollar amounts. They are percentages. And remember, God deals in percentages because God is fair. And God is fair. And he does not expect us to give a certain dollar amount. He requires us to deal in percentages. He requires us to give 10% of our money, the money that we make, to tithe. So tithe. Number two, I think it would be a good, and again, this is a recommendation. I encourage you to do whatever you think the Lord wants you to do. But I believe that it's a wise idea to give at least 5% of your income to offerings. Okay, and what is an offering? An offering is something where you take or you give your money, and well, the gospel is taken around the globe on your behalf. So give 5% to offerings, 5 to 10%. That's at least a good range. Now, I say that, but I also hesitate to say that because I don't want to limit you. I don't want you to limit God's direction on your life, and that's why I hesitate to give a percentage. But for the sake of the lesson here, I'm encouraging you to give at least 5%. So 15% of our money is going to other people. 15% of our money is going to the Lord and to the Lord's causes. Now, awesomely enough, by the way, we only have to give 10% to the Lord, or we're only technically required to give 10% to the Lord. Of course, look at Malachi 3 if you don't want to give that 10%. See what the Bible has to say about people who do not tithe. But one of the things is we get the other 90. We get to decide what we do with the other 90. And that's a pretty healthy percentage. Okay. So number 3, and this might sting a little bit, but I encourage everybody to save and invest 75% of your income. Ooh, I don't know how that gripped you, but for me, this is something that I did. This is why I actually did a little more. I'm going to explain in just a moment kind of how I approach this, but 75% of all that you bring in, I believe that you should set that aside. I believe that you should not touch it. You should put it in a savings account. You should put it in a vehicle for investment. I don't know what that is. And by the way, young people, one of the complaints I see from young people about the lessons that they were not able to learn in school, and one of them is nobody taught us how to invest. One of the things that you need to understand is that it is very dangerous to advise people on investment, mainly because if the investment falls through, the person who advised on that investment could be held liable. So if I got behind the mic today and I told you, hey, go invest in this stock. I believe it's going to go up. It's probably going to double and it's probably going to triple and you should go and invest. And then tomorrow the stock falls flat on its face. It goes all the way down to zero. You lose all your money. Well, unfortunately, one of the things unfortunately for me is that, well, you could sue me. And I would like to avoid that today. So that is one of the reasons that people we can't give you specific investment advice. We can point you to Dave Ramsey, and one of the things that, again, he says is to invest in something called mutual funds. And a mutual fund is $1 going to 10 different stocks. And so if one of them fails, well, you're only out maybe 10 cents or so. And so it's really spreading out your investment over several companies rather than, as he puts it, putting all of your eggs in one basket. Of course, if you understand what I'm saying, great. I'm not trying to go down that rabbit hole, but 75% of the money that you bring in, set it aside for the future, for a car, for a house, for a wedding, for college, whatever the case is, set it aside. And then lastly, spending 10%. Now, I will say, and I will confess that when my wife and I were first got married, one of the things is my brother would work for us, and I advised him at least to spend a little bit of his money. And he was a saver like me, and he didn't want to spend any money at that time, and so he wanted to take all that money, shove it into his bank account, and not touch a single dime of it. But I really looked at Ecclesiastes 5, verse 18, where the Bible says, "Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion." This is not the only verse in Ecclesiastes that talks about enjoying the fruit of all your labor. And so I encourage a young person to spend a little bit of money, especially when they're a young person, because one of the things that work provides is work provides some fun money. Work provides entertainment. Work provides a nice treat every once in a while. Now notice the priorities here, right? Tithe is first, offering second, saving and investing is third, and the very last thing is spending. The very last thing is yourself. If you want to have joy in this life, Jesus, others, you. Put Jesus first, others second, and put yourself last. It's a good rule of thumb. It's a good principle to live by. And so many people assume that the pursuit of money and the accumulation of more money and more wealth and more finances, well, that's going to bring joy into your life. But as we just looked at before, and as I've illustrated many times, and I've said probably several times throughout these entire episodes, is that as money can only provide a temporary happiness. Money is not going to provide long-term happiness. You can buy a nice wedding ring, but you cannot buy a happy or a peaceful marriage. So, tithe 10%, give offerings 5%. Again, I hesitate to give a percentage because I don't want to limit what the Lord wants you to do. And then thirdly, save and invest 75% of your income and then spend the last 10%. One of the things that I started doing was in 10th grade when I got my first job, when I had a first steady income. And by the way, this budget that I just gave you, it can work for any sort of situation where you don't really have any bills. Again, of course, this budget assumes that you don't have any bills. But if you have money coming in regularly, if you have money coming in intermittently, it doesn't matter. This budget works. You tithe 10%, you give 5%, another 5%, you save and invest 75%, and then you spend the last 10%. What I did was, anytime I got paid, I'd go to the bank, I'd cash the money, I'd take 5% out because I decided that I was going to save 80% of whatever I make, and then I put 80% or that 5% and I put it in my little piggy bank that I had on my dresser. And really, as somebody who didn't spend a lot of money in the first place, I was shocked by at the end of that first summer, I had saved still of my spending money. I still had over $200 left. So I was very shocked about that. And I was very thankful for that. But also 5% is a lot of money when you think about it. 5% can still buy a lot of things if you are working a lot of hours. And again, of course, I even gave you 10% to spend there. Some closing thoughts. And remember that I've tried to stick exclusively to the Bible. Please know that. But I would like to share again some practical advice with you that I believe is biblically based. Of course, one of the verses that I use a lot is let all things be done decently and in order from 1 Corinthians 14:40. Some thoughts on investing. Only invest in what you completely understand. And secondly, start investing young. So if you cannot explain an investment to maybe a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, you probably should not be investing in that product or in that stock or in any other investment opportunity. And then when we say to start investing young, and I'm going to try to get this chart actually in the episode notes, but there's a famous chart that I saw and it's been shared about, but it's from Ramsey Solutions, and it points out the fact that if you invest $2,400 a year, starting at the age of 21, and you invest that money for 9 years, just 9 years, which is a total of just $21,600. By age 68, the investment will have grown to about $2.35 million. However, on the flip side, if you wait until 30 to begin investing, you invest the same amount, but you invest it for 38 years, a total of $91,200. By age 68, again, stopping or pulling out or cashing out of retirement at the same time, the investment will have only grown to $1.38 million. That is almost $1 million less if you wait 9 years. 9 years. And so, again, if you did not understand what I said, hit the back button just once or twice, listen to me read it again, look at the chart, see what I'm talking about. But you need to start young. If you start investing young, if you start putting money in a Roth IRA young, well, in the future, you are going to be very thankful. The earlier you started, the more thankful you will be. Some thoughts on family and friends. I don't think it's wise to ever co-sign a loan with anyone. That can typically only go one direction, and that's a bad direction. And then also, if you decide to loan money to a friend or a relative, that's fine, but never loan money. Just consider it a gift. If you get it paid back, great. If not, well, you had the right mindset going into it. If you give money to somebody, if you loan money to somebody and you don't get it back, you're probably going to be very frustrated. So just consider it a gift. Thirdly, it is generally unwise to mix business and friendship. One of the stories I could tell was when my best friend got married, his wife was looking for a job, and so she asked if she could be hired on to our company. And one of the things that we looked at each other and said, you know what? We are not going to be involved in this anyway. We let my wife and his wife work together, and that was great. But we weren't going to let it affect our friendship in any way, shape, or form. Some thoughts on the internet. With few exceptions, never get your advice from the internet. The internet isn't real. Stay away from the internet. Stay off the internet when it comes to finances. Now, not exclusively. I think you understand what I mean. But read the famous books. Listen to the famous people. And again, I have air quotes around famous books and famous people. But do you know why they are famous? It's because these books, these people who talk about money, they've stood the test of time. And even though these books typically do not acknowledge the Bible, these books are firmly rooted in biblical truth. That is why they work. Books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or The Richest Man in Babylon, or The Millionaire Next Door, or The Go-Giver, all of these books do not explicitly reference the Bible, but they're all firmly rooted in biblical truth. Why, again, are they famous? It's because they've stood the test of time. These principles taught by Dave Ramsey are really good for everyone. You may disagree with some of his methods and teaching, but for the most part, they are biblically based and grounded in truth. Then, lastly, whatever teaching you take in, whatever learning you get in regard to finances, or really, again, anything for that matter, compare whatever you're listening to with what the Bible says. Money is all about perspective. Some people view money as a burden. Some people view money as a tool. Some people view it as a path to happiness. As a young person, you have to answer this question, and I want you to fill in the blank. How do you view money? Money is what to you? Is it a burden? Is it a tool? Is it a path to happiness? I hope it's not the latter. I hope you can view it as a tool. I hope you don't view it as a burden. I hope you can view it as a vehicle to provide for your family. Wow. That is all the things that I wrote down. So, are you honoring the Lord with your finances? Are you stewarding your possessions well? Are you furthering the gospel with the resources God has entrusted to you? Are false teachings about money hindering your spiritual growth? Are you following biblical principles in regard to money? The question I have for every young person when it comes to money is this: are you living for the future or the present? A good indication of that is answering the question, how long does money stay in your pocket? Is it gone in a minute? Or does it stay in there quite some time? Is the bank account growing because you don't have to spend? Are you living for the future or the present? Do you want to be successful in life? Well, follow the Lord's plan. Keep him first. Remember, he's going to take care of those who follow after righteousness. And the money is all about perspective. And this is what I was going to leave you with. And it goes and ties all the way back into our first episode. The money is all about perspective. It is not ours. It is the Lord's. How do you view money? How can we help you with money? Have any of these episodes helped you? I pray that you let us know. The Grace Way at GBAOS is the way you can do that. Thank you once again for tuning in. It has been a 9-part marathon. And what does the Bible say about money? But as we look forward to the summer here at Grace Baptist Academy, I pray that you continue to tune into the Grace Way. Thank you once again for listening. We appreciate all of you, and may we continue walking the Grace Way together.
Thank you for listening to the Grace Way. We hope today's message strengthened your connection to both the Lord and our ministry. If you have any questions you would like to have answered on the program or would like to connect with us, please email us at thegraceway@gbaos.org. Until next time, let us continue walking the Grace Way together.